Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Attorney Realtor Hub discussion on home inspection reports. My name is Chris Fick, and I'm your host today. My guest is Eric Bell of Inspector Home. Eric is from Durban and has been in the business for 35 years. Eric, very welcome with us today, and thank you for sharing your time and your expertise and your experience with us. We look forward to hearing from you about the pros and cons for a buyer or a seller when a property transaction is contemplated. Eric, I will share your slides in a little while. If you can perhaps begin to tell us more about home inspections in general and the work you do, so that we, so in that regard, to give us a property owner or buyer the so-called roadworthy certificate for a property. What is involved in giving him that certificate?
Chris, thank you very much. Thanks for the invite, and it's good to be with you all today. Basically, Inspector Home started 35 years ago, and we franchised the business about 16 years ago. And we have 15 franchises around the country, so we covered pretty much nationally, which is a good thing. Essentially, home inspections is such an important thing in our opinion because people, when they buy houses, are not always advised as to the condition of the properties. In fact, most people, when they buy properties, don't know the true condition of the house that they're buying or the property that they're buying. And so the intention is to actually explain to people why it's so important and the benefits of having a home inspection. It doesn't make sense to go and spend millions of rand, or even if you can't afford a fancy house, even a 600,000 or 700,000 rand house, to have it inspected to make sure that what you're buying is in good condition and it's not going to cost you money in the long term. We find that a lot of houses that are sold after the fact, after they've taken transfer, they find that they're defective, and it's because they don't understand the ramifications in the interim when they're buying the property, and then only afterwards do they realize that they've been sold a house that has defective items. Could be the roof, the superstructure, whatever. So we'll go through the presentation, I think, and if we go to the first slide, which is every home has defects, whether the house is brand new or an old house. And we did a survey over 2,000 homes, and we found that any house over 10 years old will have the following defects, where 49% will have roofing hassles, 26% stormwater drainage. And stormwater drainage, people are not well aware of stormwater drainage, but stormwater drainage is a huge hassle with the house because the water that comes off the roof and around the property has to go somewhere. If it settles underneath your foundations, you will end up, which you're showing you in some slides just now, some serious defects where the house cracks apart and it does untold damage. So stormwater drainage is a very big factor. Structural defects amount to about 13% of the repairs required, and then plumbing and electrical follow up with 20–30%. With plumbing and electrical, you do in the Cape, you get a plumbing certificate, whereas in other parts of South Africa, Joburg and Durban, for example, it's not required, but it is a prerequisite. Electrical, obviously, the whole country has to have electrical compliance certificates. We don't do electrical in as much as, because of electrical compliance certificate, we look at the electrics and we often find things wrong, but because there is a compliance certificate, the electrician takes responsibility for that. So that gives you sort of a good indication, but we find even brand new houses have serious defects. Ones that you know have basically been built in the last 4 to 5 years. They may have been built under the National Home Builders Registration Council regulations, but they haven't been supervised properly and defects occur. I'll go into that just now when we go through it further. So if we go to the next slide, let's go to the next one. How this affects the client. Well, it's, you buy a house with defects, you're going to have unexpected costs and stress. And one of the biggest problems is that people, when they buy houses, they normally pool their resources. Their husband and the wife pool their salaries together, and they buy as expensively as they can so that they get the nicest house they can afford. But they don't often make provision for eventualities such as problems with the roof or problems with the superstructure or damp issues, etc. So they buy this dream home, and then it turns into a nightmare when they find that they've actually bought a house that has lots of defects and they cannot afford to fix it. They go to the bank say, well, you're maxed out, we can't lend you any more money. And so they now are faced with a situation where they either try to get it fixed and get into debt, or they try to sell it, but they can't sell it because it's got defects, and you can't sell a house with defects, not legally anyway. So that's one of the factors. So, you know, it's just a no-brainer that you buy a house without having somebody to check it out for you. Clients buy on emotion and are not aware of defects. When people go to look at a house, they don't look at the roof to see if the roof has got defects. They don't climb into the roof cavity. They don't go around checking the house for cracks. Well, some people might, but they probably won't see them, especially if they've been cosmetically patched up. So importantly, that people buy an emotion because it's got nice bathrooms, and nice kitchen, nice living area, nice bright area, nice pool, etc. But the fact that the roof might be in a shocking condition, which we'll show you on the slides just now, is not of consequence because they can't see it because it's hidden away. So as far as comes to latent defects, hidden latent defects, was the seller aware? So, you know, it's always debatable. We tend to be a bit cynical on this because we say that often sellers are aware. If you're living in a house for 20, 30 years, you should know the condition of your property to a reasonable extent. You don't have to know the technical aspects of it, but if the roof leaks, you should know the roof leaks. In a lot of cases, people don't disclose those type of situations, and latent defects basically are defects that you cannot see with a naked eye. Cosmetic ones are patent defects, those you can see with the naked eye, but things that have actually been cosmetically covered up or are not cannot be seen because they are under the roof cavity or whatever, those are classified as latent defects. But there's no stopping anybody getting into the roof or onto the roof, but latent defects basically classified like that.
There's actually quite an obligation on a purchaser, Eric, to look at the property properly and look in the roof for that matter, or whatever he can see is patent that he must take responsibility for. Whatever is latent can't be seen, and which the seller is aware of, the seller should declare, should tell him about or her about. But if the seller doesn't know about a latent defect either, of course the voetstoots clause then covers him, and the buyer will then buy the property warts and all as it is.
Sure.
Not so.
I agree. The unfortunate thing is that it's a bit of a nebulous thing because sellers will sometimes say that they didn't know of something when they did that, when it was obvious that they should have been aware of it. The bottom line is that the onus becomes on the buyer, and it's the buyer that ends up having to pay to repair all these things, and which is why we always say, you know, why not spend 3,000 or 4,000 rand or 2,500 rand on having an inspection done, which will tell you all these things. But of course, it doesn't happen like that. So and also people are trusting. You know, buyers are not going to walk into somebody's house, especially when it's furnished, and start climbing into the roof or climbing on the roof or start moving the furniture around, because first of all, it's rude to do that, and you're basically not trusting the person that's selling the house, because normally the seller will say to you, oh, it's a lovely house, etc. So one is loath to go and actually start looking around and looking behind things and under things, but you should do it. And you should, as I say, you have got the option of calling in a professional inspection company, which is what we do, but people sometimes try to do it on their own. And then of course afterwards, after the fact, then it becomes a huge issue. And people also believe that because they're being dealt with by a reputable estate agent and that the seller seems to be a nice person, that they trust the person, and that can be your biggest downfall. And of course, the lack of protection for the buyer with the voetstoots clause is another big thing, because when you buy a voetstoots, you're buying as is. And you see what you see is what you get. And of course, that is cause for a lot of concern, and that's why there's been court cases, because people now try to sue the seller and whatever, which becomes very expensive, and ultimately they don't always get the satisfactory conclusion, and it all leads up in client dissatisfaction. You don't have you don't have a nice relationship with the people that sold you the house, and you end up suing them, and you end up with this nightmare of a situation that you now got to fix.
Eric, you've got some examples to us of the kind of defects that can be hiding
Yes.
from the purchaser and possibly also from the seller. Can I give you the next slide?
Let's go for the next slide, okay? Okay, so this is examples. They look extreme, but I can tell you that in some cases we see even more extreme cases than this. But the one on the left-hand side, this house was damaged by insect infestation, wood borer, and also wood rot. That shows that the roof trusses are really in bad condition and have rotted away. It's not that unusual, especially in the coastal areas where you get a lot of coastal fungus and you get insect infestation attacking the timber. Not just necessarily wood borer, but you get wood mites, etc. That cause like a furring of the timber. But that shows you a good example of what some roofs look like when we go inside. Now, it might look perfectly good, but you know, underneath in the rooms below, but that's what you're dealing with up top. Now, that whole roof is holding up tons of roof trusses and tiles and whatever, and that could all come crashing down if it's not properly supported. If you look at the second picture shows another roof, which in actual fact has been damaged by water ingress, and wood rot has caused the timber trusses to fail, and it's in danger of collapse. That one's in danger of collapse. Again, the house looked fine on the outside, had a slight dip in the roof, but the inside was really, really bad, and had to be braced and repaired and whatever to make it livable. Okay, so if we go to the next one, next page. Okay, so a lot of roofs start off with little cracks in the roof tiles like this one here. But to fix that is not so easy, because that roof tile is actually held on by the ridge cappings, and the ridge cappings is cemented on. So to take that tile out, you've got to loosen the ridge cappings. You probably have to take off 3 or 4 ridge cappings. And you'll find that there's probably, because these tiles are quite brittle, maybe sometimes we find 15 or 20 tiles, broken tiles on a roof. It looks perfectly good from the ground, but unless you get up to inspect it. And this is caused probably by, we have a lot of problems here in Natal with monkeys causing this sort of damage, because they jump from trees onto the roof and they're quite heavy, they damage the tiles. Or it can be tradesmen walking on the roof, the TV repairmen, electricians, etc. And of course, if they break a tile, they don't tell you. So you buy a house and you find that you've now got to have the roof repaired because it's got a lot of broken tiles on it. Or in the picture on the right, you're looking at a roof that's been repaired by a supposed proficient person, where they've repaired the roof totally incorrectly. Those are valleys that are painted green there, and you're never ever supposed to flash a valley. That valley has been coated with paint and with a sealant and a membrane. And what it's done is actually makes the problem 100% worse, because if you've got cracked tiles like in the picture on the left, the water gets through there, runs on the underlay, and then gets down to the valley because it has fallen it, and it now collects behind the valley. It can't get out, and then it will pull and come through in areas and flood the inside of your house. So never ever should a valley be sealed like that. It's supposed to be open with valley irons that are exposed so the water can flow, and also any debris can be washed off the roof on the valley irons. That's the whole purpose of having a valley, an open valley like that. So the person who did that was an absolute idiot. He should never have done what he did. And he probably charged, I mean, to fix a valley like that, probably 4,000 or 5,000 rand. So, okay, on the cause and effect. Now, the tiles on this roof, on the left-hand picture, those are Marcel roof tiles. They're clay roof tiles. They are porous tiles because they're clay. And a roof, people don't realize that when a roof gets wet, especially when it's a day or two of rain, incessant rain, the tiles end up weighing twice as much as they do when they're dry. And because the battens on these older roofs that are 50, 60 years old, those are all Oregon battens, Oregon timber battens. The timber has reached the sell-by date, and you find that the timber starts to sag, and eventually it breaks. And then if you walk on the roof, you'll fall through it. If you look at the picture on the right, that's exactly what's happened. Somebody has actually walked on the roof, and the roof has collapsed, and you have tiles falling through it, can injure people below, etc. So buying a house with an old roof, it must be checked out. It must be inspected to make sure that the timber battens are in good condition, that there's a decent underlay, and that the roof is in good condition and it has longevity. You don't want to buy a house and then go and spend 150, 200,000 Rand having the roof repaired. So yeah, that's the advantage of having an inspection done. So if we go to the next one. Okay, so this is quite a good indication that we've got this set up to show you. So the picture on the left shows an area on the outside of the house where the ground has been sunken in. And why? Because there's a downpipe, and that downpipe discharges water off the roof. And because the ground in the higher part, which is running towards the house, the water falls towards the house, and this area pulls, so the water can't get away. So the water's coming down the downpipe, and also surface water's coming, and this area was ending up like a lake. So what happens? The water soaks in. This is where we're talking about stormwater drainage. The water soaks into the ground, and it gets underneath the foundations, and it causes the foundations to sag. And when the foundations sag, of course, the superstructure, which is the brickwork above ground level, sags with it, and consequently the pictures, the middle picture and the other picture, that's the outside of the house and inside the house, cracks develop. It's because basically it's broken its back. The house is pitched down, and somewhere it has to go, and it goes normally around air vents or around windows, and the cracks like this develop. So now, on the strength of it, you'd look at a house like this and you'd say, gee, I don't want to buy this house because this house is in terrible condition, it's got bad cracks, etc. But in actual fact, it's an relatively easy fix. So if we go to the picture on the left, we look at that picture and say, okay, fine, so how do we fix it? We fix it by taking away the paving, lifting all the paving. It's just butt jointed paving. Lift that, stack it, dig down, get underneath the foundations that have now sagged, and you go underneath them and you put in a concrete pad, like 1 meter by 2 meters pad underneath the foundation. So what you're doing is you're taking the weight of the foundations, but we call it the footprint, and you're extending it out onto a concrete pad. That concrete pad will stop any further movement, but you have to get rid of the water. So you would then put a gully, a little concrete gully, to collect the water at the bottom of the downpipe with a underground pipe, 4-inch underground pipe, and which would take the water away and have a surface drain to collect the surface water, so there would be no more water there. Now you've solved the problem why the house was breaking. So once you do that, you replace the paving and make it look good again, etc. Now you come to repair the house. So you take the cracks, you chop the plaster back on either side of the crack about 300, you metal stitch the crack using steel rods and epoxy. You then put what's called a metal lath or chicken mesh over the crack, with and then you replaster and repaint the house, and the crack will never reappear again, because basically you fixed it properly and you solved the problem. We find so many houses, especially houses that have had alterations and additions, that have got cracks like this where the new part breaks away from the old part, mainly because the foundations were never ever properly instituted, and they were never actually bonded onto the old foundations. You're supposed to put steel rods on top of the bottom of the old foundations and then cast your new foundations, and also make them wider, and also put pads at the end of the new extension. Put pads so that you can actually extend the footprint out so that you don't get settlement and then you don't get cracks in the building. But builders today don't do that sort of thing because nobody's telling them what to do. They don't have proper regulations, even though the NHBRC regulations are for new houses. It doesn't apply to doing alterations. So we find a lot of alterations have problems. Anyway, getting to the next slide. Okay, so a lot of problems that we have with houses, especially when we're inspecting them, is damp issues. Now, damp issues are some of the most difficult ones to fix because you'll find that once the water's got in, it takes months and months and months to get rid of the water because the water's now got to dry out. It doesn't dry out easily because the walls are painted or whatever. So a crack like this on the left-hand side, this is a screen wall, but it could be on the side of a house, etc. We get lots of cracks on buildings, and that crack will absorb liters of water in just one rainfall, one downpour, because the water gets into the crack, it soaks it up because the bricks are porous, soaks it up, but that water now is encapsulated inside there, and it takes months to get out. The resultant is, if you look at the picture on the right, where exactly that's happened. There's damp got into the plaster and got into the brickwork, and what happens is the plaster debonds. You get effervescence from the bricks because the salts of the bricks wash out, and then the plaster starts peeling off because the plaster can't bond anymore, and also the paint peels off. Now, to fix that, you can't just go and scrape it off and repaint it. You've got to strip the plaster off. In a case like that where it's quite severe, you'd have to strip all the plaster off and replaster it and repaint it once it's dried out properly. So the costs involved are not exorbitant, but they will cost you quite a lot of money to fix this sort of thing. So damp problems are a big issue. Okay, so next one. Okay, so these two houses here were in gated estates up on the north coast. This house on the left here, it doesn't look like it's a brand new house, hasn't been lived in. This roof had a shallower pitch. Normally a roof has to have a minimum of 17 degrees of concrete roof tiles on it. This roof had a 10-degree pitch, but the builders didn't build it with a 10-degree pitch. As you can see, it's actually got a negative pitch because they've been standing on the tiles, and because the tiles, it's what's called Harvey tile. It's a tin type roof, like corrugated iron, but this is now pressed steel. The tiles, in actual fact, have been stood on, and they've now changed shape, and they've now got a -4. The other thing too, people don't realize that Harvey tile roofs are suitable for inland more, but not for coastal. Now, this is in a coastal estate, not even a kilometer from the sea. So by putting a roof like this on, even though the gated estate have got an architecture review committee, they didn't pick up the fact that these tiles are not suitable for coastal conditions, and this roof won't last 10 years. And so you put on a roof like this, and in 10 years' time, it will be so rusted because the water will get in underneath the tiles, and it will cause corrosion. And then if you look at the valley on the same left-hand picture, that piece of sheet metal sticking out. That's supposed to be a valley iron. There's been water damage in the walls already. All the walls are bubbling. I mean, the house has not even been lived in yet when this picture was taken. Now this is what's happened. Now, it was passed by the NHBRC, it was passed by the building inspectorate, and the builder was totally oblivious to what he'd done wrong until I pointed it out to him. He had to replace the whole roof. It cost him over 120,000 Rand to put a new roof on this house because of what we found wrong. So great savings there. The house on the right, also the same gated estate, a different house, where they did a flat roof over the veranda area. The flat roof was plastered and then was waterproofed with torch on waterproofing. The trouble with the plaster was they didn't put enough cement in the sand, and the sand was porous and was like trying to glue something onto talcum powder because the sand was granular and hadn't cured properly. So they put the waterproofing on. The waterproofing started to bubble, so they kept on patching it and fixing it. Now, this is a brand new roof over a veranda, a 9 million Rand home, and this whole roof had to be stripped, replastered, and re-waterproofed. So it just goes to show you that just because it's new, it doesn't rot. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Okay, so back to damp issues. When houses are built, irrespective of the year they were built, they were also always supposed to have waterproofing at slab level. So when you build up to the first level out of the ground, normally 2 or 3 courses above ground level, you put in a damp-proof course. And that damp-proof course is designed to stop the absorption of water from the ground and get it, suck it up through the brickwork, because whether it's clay brick or concrete brick, they're porous and they will absorb moisture and they will cause damp issues. So when you get to slab level, if you've got a plastered house, in the old days they used to do face brick up to slab level, and then they would do plaster above slab level. So you'd see 2 or 3 courses of face brick. Today they don't do that so much. They do the plaster continuous all the way down into the ground. Of course, that's crazy because it's like a sponge. It soaks the moisture up, and what causes it causes all the plaster to absorb, as well as the bricks to absorb. Everything debonds, the paint peels off, the plaster, as you can see, is all calcifying and comes off, and you end up with a nightmare because you've got your plumbing in the way, so you can't replaster because you've got to take the plumbing off. So now you've got to call in a plumber. That's going to cost you thousands of rand. Now you've got to replaster the side of the house, waterproof the brickwork. It all takes time and money, and it can be circumvented purely by having at slab level a plastic strip 230 millimeters wide that actually stops the water from absorbing up, and also creates a joint so that the water cannot suck up into the outside plaster when it's replastered. The picture on the right shows an extreme case, exactly the same thing, where the water has absorbed up into the wall. To try and fix that and to try and repair it costs a lot of money, because you've got to replaster, and now you've got to try and cosmetically cover the joint and the plaster, because you've got old plaster, new plaster, and it could be circumvented. People buy houses like that and think, oh, well, I just put a coat of paint on it. It doesn't work. You can't fix that. Not without seriously rectifying it. Okay.
Eric, so you give us all the horror stories there, and things we should look at as buyers, even as sellers, when we want to market our houses. But now, the wise thing to do.
Well, the wise thing to do, I mean, it's so easy to pick up the phone and to phone a professional firm of home inspectors and to get the house checked out. It costs an average house, 3-bedroom house, costs between 2,500 to 3,500 for a standard house, it's got double garage, etc. But the benefits are so great, because the important thing is you have total peace of mind. That's the main thing. So you can buy a house, have it inspected, and you know that if it's a reputable company, that you're not going to have hassles for the first 10 or 15 years. And that we make sure that in our reports, every report we do, we write says that we maintain that no serious defects, other defects will become apparent for the foreseeable future. So you've got that nice warm fuzzy feeling about it. So can we just go back to that previous slide? Sorry, we're jumping.
Previous slide, okay.
You've jumped to, sorry. Just go back to, yeah, sorry, no, okay, go forward now. Okay, sorry. That's it. Okay, so yeah, we've been in the business, as you said earlier on, for over 35 years, and there are other inspection companies, and we're happy to have competition. That's not the issue, but you know, you have to be careful. A lot of them maintain that they belong to this association, that association, and in actual fact, they don't, or they claim to be builders, or they're members of the NHBOC, and they're not. So just be very careful. Better to use a company that's got a long track record, and that can prove their validity. I think that's the importance, because it's.
How would a purchaser, Eric? How would a purchaser actually know when I'm dealing with a? I mean, there can be a beautiful website, not necessarily a beautiful work. So, is there some kind of standard, some kind of body that accredits them,
Yes.
or we can say, well, okay, this guy's got that qualification or that membership,
Yes.
so we can make sure that we get the right guy to come and do the inspection.
Sure. The thing is this, is that we belong to a number of organizations. I'm executive director for Internachi, which is an American company in Boulder, Colorado. I'm the South African director of Internachi. I'm also with ASHI, American Society of Home Inspectors. I've been a member there for a long time. NHBRC, National Home Builders Registration Council. I'm a member of that, and our company is registered with them. In fact, NHBRC uses a lot in building dispute matters because we get involved and we can help them. They don't get involved in legal matters. We do, so we get referred in lots of cases. And of course, SASHI, which is an offshoot of ASHI, which is the American Society. SASHI stands for South African Society of Home Inspectors. We've been a member of Max Lawrence's operation for the last 20 odd years. There are other people that claim to be in the business, and but they've stolen our information and tried to plagiarize our stuff, and they call it something else now. But this, to our knowledge, there's been nothing legislated to date. So better to just be careful of the fact that if you want to have an inspection, choose a company that's been around for a long time, and we're happy to recommend other companies. If you don't want to use Inspect Home for whatever reason, we're happy to say, well, this is a good company, but this is not a good company, because we've been around. And being also on the board with Internachi, I wouldn't tell anybody any intrusives, etc. So it's I think important to understand, but it's difficult for the man in the street because they're guided by fancy websites.
The man in the street. Yeah, definitely difficult, because it's not as you can say, well, okay, if I have a problem with this lawyer, I'm going to report him to the Law Society. Who do I report you to if you don't do proper work?
Well, yeah, it's the same thing with as a builder. I mean, the builders today. I mean, you can become a building. You yourself can become a building contractor. Go and buy a bucky and a couple of wheelbarrows and pick up some guys on the side of the road, and you become a soft-press building contractor. And you can take on multi-million rand homes, and the man in the street doesn't know how good you are. If you're a smooth talker, you can take on the job. I mentioned when we were talking earlier on today, when we were having a discussion, I mean, I'm representing a very well-known rugby player at the moment who's got a 10 million rand home in a gated estate. And if I tell you that his house has got to have 2 million rands of the repairs to it because the swimming pool was built over the bedroom area, and the engineer designed the wrong slab. They didn't bag and brick seal the inner brickwork. The house is badly designed, and he's got water running down the walls in his bedroom. He's got damp in the walls. He's got 93% damp in his retaining walls in his bedroom area. And this is a guy that you all know. All I can say to you is that there are many people out there, and that same builder that built his house built 2 other houses in the same estate. Also, I was involved with. And you cannot believe that these people are allowed to get away with it. And the NHBRC, unfortunately, are not powerful enough to actually, they don't just say, well, we're going to get rid of that builder. They do strike them off the roll occasionally, or they give them a 15,000 rand fine. I mean, they build a 10 million rand home. I mean, the sum total of those 3 houses was 45 million. And that same builder built those 3 houses, and all 3 houses had the same sort of problems: no expansion joints, bad damp problems, etc., etc. So, but all we can say is beware. It's not an easy thing.
Yeah, so you can't really judge or assess the builder, and you can't really assess the home inspector either, other than looking at qualifications and track record, reputation perhaps.
What I was going to say to you is that a rule of thumb, because people say to us often, can we recommend a builder, or can we recommend a plasterer, or can we recommend this? And we always say, no, we can't. But what we say to the people, the best rule of thumb is this, is that if you want to find out how good a person is, get them to give you 3 references and check him out thoroughly. If he's built houses for people, get hold of those people and say, first and foremostly, were you happy with the guy? Did he do a good job? Probably the answer is going to be no. Would you recommend him again? Did you owe him money at the end of it because he didn't do the job properly and you had to get other people in? In a lot of cases, builders will say, oh, that I worked for this guy and that guy and whatever. In the meantime, you contact that person. The person said, I'll kill him if I see him again because he did such a terrible job. Or my wife would never have him back in the house again. And that's a common problem we have. Okay. So, that's that. So, yeah, and the same thing applies with if we can give, if people ask us for testimonials of people that have had inspections done, you can go onto our website. You'll find that we've got a lot of testimonials on our website from happy buyers that have actually used our service and say that they've used us for the last 10 or 15 years and swear by us because they've built a number of houses over that period of time. So that's
Eric, the
one
other
way
thing I want, you also have mentioned to me, you don't actually believe the defects disclosure list, which sellers now have to give as part of the process
Yes.
to a buyer, all right, before he makes an offer. Should in that the seller must disclose of all the latent defects that he knows of, right?
Yes.
If it's something in the electrical system or maybe a leaking roof, which the purchaser can't see by just looking at the house. Now that is an effort to in fact inform the purchaser of defects which you may not be able to see. But if a seller doesn't declare that, then he will not be protected by the voetstoots clause unless the purchaser can prove that he hid that from him in a fraudulent way. So you don't much believe in that disclosure list, do you?
No, look, the whole thing's a smokescreen. I mean, when you've got a disclosure document, and most of these disclosure documents have been written with the following wording, and it says at the top, and I refer to most of the big name estate agencies. This is a true and honest evaluation of the property as I know it. Now, what is that telling you? It's telling you as I know it. So in other words, it's a true and honest valuation, but is it really? Because they fill this thing in, and often you'll find that the estate agent sits with often the seller is at work, and I sit with his wife, say, we need to fill this document in. Do you have any defects in the house? Do you have any problems? Do you have any waterproofing problems? And the wife says, oh, no. Do you have any problems with the roof? No, I don't think so. Do you have any problems with the superstructure? Have you any cracks? No, we haven't got any cracks. And so it goes on. So this document is filled in, and at the end it says there, signed here by the seller and signed here by the agent. And then this document is waved in the face of the buyer, and the buyer says, well, I'd like to have the house inspected. So now, well, full disclosure's been made in accordance with the Consumer Protection Act and blah, 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 and whatever. I mean, I've seen it thousands of times. And so the buyer, like the land distorter, goes and signs this thing. Now, afterwards, they move in and they find this is wrong and that's wrong, or whatever. And they say, what does the seller say? He says, so, sorry, I didn't know. Now you've got to prove that the seller didn't know. So, and asking the seller to fill in a defects list, in often, I mean, especially if they're a person that's a attorney or what's his name, or a accountant or whatever, he doesn't know about his house. And you can't expect them, and you can't expect the estate agent. I mean, the estate agents are good at what they do in a lot of cases, but when it comes to actually declaring defects, they don't get onto roofs or into roofs like we do. They don't actually examine the property. They make it might look very nice, but it might be a hornet's nest of things wrong. But they'll sell the house and sleep at night knowing full well that that house may have defects. And then afterwards, and I mean, I'm in touch with a lot of estate agents, and I get on very well with most of the estate agents that we deal with. And they tell me that they do have a lot of hassles, but they don't disclose the problems that they have. And we do get called in a lot of times by estate agents to inspect houses. And I mean, simple things like, for example, old houses that have got raised floors, you know, where the floor sits about half a meter off the ground. All those old houses have got what's called tongue and groove flooring. Now we inspect those floors because what people don't understand is that the tongue and groove flooring does, every time you sand the floors, because people want to sand the floors. In the old days, they didn't used to sand the floors. They used to put linoleum or carpeting on those floors. But when they started renovating houses in the 80s and 90s, they started sanding the floors and putting on Bourne gleams and different varnishes, etc. What happened was that you sand the floor 2 or 3 times. You actually sand 2 millimeters off every time you sand the floor. So you end up with you exposing the tongues, and you've also thinned the timber down by as much as 30%. Now, when you walk on the floors creak, and also they look ugly because the tongues are exposed. Now, we actually use a depth mark, and we check the depth of all the timber. Now, no other company does this, but what we do is we make sure that the people that are buying these old houses to renovate know full well the pitfalls, because to replace the floor in one room can cost you over 100,000 Rand in Oregon, at least 100,000 Rand. So if you've got half a dozen rooms, that's 600,000 or 700,000, 800,000 Rand you've got to spend redoing the floors. If the floors are affected by borer or wood rot, or they have been oversanded. And that, oversanding is a common problem, but people don't know. No estate agent will tell you, don't buy this house because the floor's been oversanded, or don't buy this house because the roof leaks. You know what I'm saying? So very important to know that people out there buy houses, they don't know the real condition.
Well, what you are saying is that, you know, the owner may not know because he's not a handyman kind of person or a technical kind of person, practical kind of person, and the agent won't know either. And that's why they need somebody like a home inspection. Because if the owner doesn't know, he's not lying by filling in that defects disclosure list. He's just saying what he knows. He doesn't know more, so that's fair. And the purchaser won't know because he doesn't know the house at all. So really, you need somebody like a home inspector to properly assess and tell the seller and the buyer, listen, this is the problem, right? And adapt your price accordingly, or, you know, offer less or don't buy.
I think the thing that makes me get a little bit sort of hot under the collar is the fact that we see so much of it where houses get sold where there isn't disclosure when there should be disclosure, and the people knew about the problems, and afterwards they get tackled because, I mean, you find like black plastic refuse bags being stuck under tiles and stuff like that, and you can see it in your bag, that sort of thing. So I mean, but I'm not saying that everybody's dishonest, because they're not. But you need to know, and as I said previously, that out of 100 houses that we inspect, 90 might be in reasonable condition, but those 10% that we inspect that have got serious defects, you don't want to buy one of those houses. You don't want, for 2 or 3 grand or 4 grand, you don't want to end up with serious problems that's going to cost you a couple of $100 grand of the legal fees, and you don't even know if you're going to get your money back at the end of the day because the people might have left the country or whatever. So, you know, it's just a simple thing. Spend a reasonable amount of money, 3,000 or 4,000 Rand, have the house inspected, and then you know that you're not going to have hassles, or if you do buy it and it has got things, that you know what you're dealing with, and you know that you can make provision for it, and possibly the price. And I mean, in a lot of cases when we do inspections, we say, look, this, and we did discuss this morning about the cost of rectification. We don't put the cost of rectification because it's a bit of a difficult one, because we might say it'll cost 100 grand and the seller says, no, you can do it for 10 grand. Of course he can't, but his impression is that he doesn't want to spend 100,000 Rand. But the bottom line is that we say that it's going to cost X, Y, Z. We can give you a costing on it, an approximate costing on it, and you can get the price reduced to cover the costs, which pays tenfold over what your inspections cost. So it's a no-brainer. It's a win-win situation. If you have a house inspected, at least you know you're not going to be in for serious costs at the end of it. You know?
Eric, you've been overseas as well, looking at what they do over there. In the US and in Europe, it is quite common to have these done, not so?
Well, absolutely. The difference between South Africa and the States, for example, in America, you have realtors. Now, you have a realtor for the buyer and a realtor for the seller. So the buyer's realtor, and I mean, estate agents over there, and I've got a friend who's an estate agent in Vancouver, and I mean, they have quite a lot of integrity. I'm not saying South African estate agents don't have integrity, but they seem to have a lot of integrity over there, and they wouldn't think of recommending a house for sale without having it inspected, because there are more complex features. For example, houses there have to have underfloor heating and indoor heating. So heat loss is a big problem. In South Africa, we try to keep the heat out. In America and Canada, they try to keep the heat in because it costs a lot of money to heat up their property. So that's one of the factors. So you've got insulation and all those sort of things that they inspect for. But the important thing is that your realtor wouldn't think about recommending a house without checking it out, because his clients are invariably long-term clients, and he sells them houses every few years and whatever. In South Africa, you have a conflict of interest because your estate agent deals with both the buyer and the seller. So the seller pays the agent's commission, and they tend to generally, and I say generally, lean towards the seller because that's the first contact. The buyer comes along afterwards. And invariably, the buyer's trying to get the price down. So the buyer becomes a bit of a dirty word, so to speak. So the buyer's already trying to bring the price down. The seller's trying to keep the price up. The estate agent's trying to sell the house. So the bottom line is it becomes a bit of a tricky situation, because now when somebody comes along to inspect the house, the estate agents seem to feel, oh, well, we might lose the house if we have it inspected. But as I said this morning, 95%, 98% of the houses we inspect get sold with our reports, and the people only want peace of mind. So they're not interested, they're not going to spend 3,000 or 4,000 Rand with us and then throw it away. So they already know they want the house, but they want the peace of mind. They want to know what's wrong, and they can negotiate the price if there are things that need to be fixed. And in a number of cases, people will compromise and say, okay, well, the seller will say, look, I'll tell you what, if it's going to cost 100 grand, I'll put 50 grand towards it. I'll reduce the price by 50 grand. The buyer says, fantastic, thanks very much, have a nice day. And he comes and has his own floors put in or whatever needs to be done. And so everybody's happy. But if you sell a house where there are defects and they're not disclosed, and now you've got to go and fight for that money, that becomes a whole different thing. Then your house is your dream house becomes a nightmare.
Okay, I'm just going to go through the rest of the slides quickly. If you want to add something, you can just stop me.
Those are the associations that we belong to. Membership numbers are there. That's another thing too. If people say that they belong to NHBRC, for example, they probably don't, because I'm the only person I know that belongs to NHBRC. But be that as it may, that you need to be able to check out people's credentials. That's, I think, an important thing if you want to use them.
You can check.
Go to the next one.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
The difference.
Okay. So, sorry.
And carry on. That's okay.
Okay. So our reports are professionally prepared. They're very detailed. They're totally unbiased. We don't try to make the house. We're not trying to find things wrong so that you end up getting a palace. We're just looking at telling the report telling it like it is. So our reports are not designed to try for betterment, but only to fix things. You also are not buying a new house. So we say that, it needs to be repaired. For example, if an underlay is damaged or torn, you don't have to put a whole new underlay, and you can repair a section of it, because you're not buying a new house. If the underlay was totally perished and it was lying in tatters and whatever, then the new underlay would have to be put in, because it's reached a replacement time and the battens are shot. But otherwise, it's a case of repairing the house to good standards, not to Rolls-Royce conditions. And all my guys are trained that only to put that type of information in. So in other words, you get what you're paying for, but it must be in good condition. You don't want to buy a house that's got leaky roofs or cracks or this and that. So it's an unbiased report. Quality descriptions, in other words, we specifically detail technically. It's no good saying the doofamajig here or whatever. You've got to say that the roof truss timbers are so and so. And if you find that a house has got a bad borer, you can say that there's 27 roof trusses, of which 7 are defective, and they need to be repaired by bolting new piece of timber on. People then know that there's probably about 15 or 16% of the roof trusses need to have some attention. And you can say this needs to be done over a period of the next 2 to 3 years. There's no serious danger of collapse, but it needs to be done, because otherwise your structural integrity is affected. Then it's important to know what you're buying. And we supply supporting photographs with everything that we do. So we can actually, every house that we inspect probably has 200 to 300 photographs, which we put onto a stick and we keep that. So you can come back to us in 6 months' time or a year's time and say, listen, I've bought this house. Now all of a sudden the rainy season's come and the roof's leaking, etc. And say, well, there's the pictures of the house we took 6 months ago when we did the inspection, and you can see there was absolutely no sign of any problems. We don't have houses like this, but if we do, we've got the supporting documentation. Also, if necessary, all our guys are well versed in legal matters, and our reports do, and in hundreds of cases, stood up in court, and we can give a good testimony, because my guys are trained to do that.
Right.
And we've had we've had no claims against our company in 35 years of operating. which is we're very proud of that, because nobody's ever said to us we didn't do our job.
Sure. You're a lawyer's nightmare.
I was waiting for that one. So, okay, so on inspections, we do a very, I'll keep it brief, pre-sale. Pre-sale inspections are basically to call us in before you intend to buy the property. So in other words, you like the house, but you'd like to have it checked out before you think about making an offer. That's a pre-sale. Pre-purchase is when you write into the contract that you wish to buy the house, subject to an inspection report by inspector, and you put there against any serious defects with the roof, superstructure, and damp issues, including stormwater management issues, whatever. So basically, because you can't, sometimes you find that the buyer will use the report and say, I don't want to buy the house anymore because the cornices are cracking. I mean, that's rubbish. I mean, it's got to be serious issues. So that we always say that it's got to be serious issues. And then the post-purchase. Now, the post-purchase is quite an important one, because people buy houses and then afterwards they come along and say, well, I bought this house, but now I found that I've moved in and I'm really upset because I've got buyer's remorse and the house has got these defects, whatever. So we'll go and we'll do an inspection and we'll find out if these defects are latent or patent, and we will then write a report that can be used if necessary in litigation, and we would be able to back that up with taking samples of the timber or samples of whatever to say that this must have been evident at the time of sale. So and that's one of the things. And then we do quality control programs. Now, quality control means that we would check the quality of the building during the build process. So that's a very important thing that we do. We do that for developers, architects, and buyers, include building and renovation. So it can be renovating and also new buildings. And that means that we would go there on a regular basis and we'd inspect the build process, and we'd find things wrong. And the builders don't know we're coming. We don't say to the builder, we'll meet you there on Tuesday at 10 o'clock so you can make everything look nice. We just rock up there, we show up there and we say, we're here to check on what you're doing, and we see that the plaster's not being done mixed properly, or that the bricks are inferior bricks, or that the brickwork's poor, or they're not bagging bricks in, or whatever. We also get involved in building disputes. In other words, invariably building disputes happen because the builder's not building according to what the clients are happy with, and they now don't want to pay him, and the builder's upset. Sometimes we work for the builder against the client, sometimes we work for the client against the builder, depending upon who calls us in. But sometimes clients are very unreasonable and they're expecting things that they actually didn't get. So we work, but we always tell it like it is. So it's totally unbiased. We don't lean either side. If a builder's wrong, we say the builder's wrong. If the client's wrong, we tell them the client's wrong. So it's a good means. It's not an arbitration, it's a dispute. And we normally settle those. They don't go to court. And invariably, what we say in a building dispute matter is very simple. If the builder's owed, say, 200,000 or 300,000 rand, and I've done lots of these, hundreds of these, we say to the client, say, okay, fine, you don't want to pay the guy. He doesn't want to do any more work for you until such time as he's guaranteed that he's going to get paid. So we say, okay, the builder will come back and finish the job, but you must put that 240,000 into a trust account. And on my instructions, if I'm happy with the work, that you must pay him. Are you happy with that? And they say yes. Normally 99% of the time say yes. The builder says, okay, fine, I'll come back and work. Say to the builder, you don't get any more money till you're finished, and you get the whole amount. I'm not going to give you drips and drabs, because once you've taken half of it, you may not come back. So the builder knows he's got to come back, finish the job. The client's now relaxed because now somebody's handling it for them, and invariably the wife gets left with this problem, because the wife, in actual fact, often have to deal with the builder and pay the builder, and that because the husband's busy or away, etc. So the building disputes work really, really well for us. Snag lists are basically what they say. People tend to do snagging on their own. When people snag houses, they don't know what they're doing, because snagging is not just a cosmetic thing. It's not just look at a little dent in the wall or ceiling or whatever. It's to look at, was the roof put on properly? Was it tied down? Did they use hoop iron? Did this get done? Did that get done, etc. So the snag lists are very important things, and the snag list doesn't get done when the house is finished and painted. The snag list should be done during the course of painting, but when we can see that it's nearing completion. Then we do a desnag at the end of it, where we go through all the things that we found wrong. We give them a list of it, and then we go through and we check. Sometimes we've got to go back 2 or 3 or 4 times for snagging. Snag lists invariably are the cost of it, should be the building dispute as well. We say to the client, it shouldn't cost you anything because you owe him money. Deduct my costs off of his costs, out of his money that you owe, and it doesn't cost you anything because he's forced you into using me because you're so unhappy with the work that he's been doing. The same thing with snagging. There's a lot of things wrong. The client shouldn't have to pay for that because at that stage of the game, it should have been almost finished to perfection. So specific areas, inspections, etc. We do various types of roof, structural damp issues, whatever, which we've already discussed. And we can custom design reports to suit clients' requirements. So in other words, whatever you want done, even if it's a barn in a field or whatever, we can actually do reports, tennis courts, jacuzzis, or whatever. We've had experience in all these type of aspects. So, importantly, one thing that nobody else ever thinks about, and you're going to choose a piece of land, people choose land badly. They choose land where there's lots of trees, for example, or at the bottom of a hill. Don't build houses at bottoms of hills because invariably you're going to have water problems in the ground. You're going to have high water table where the water is just below the surface. So you build into a flay area, you're going to have hassles, you're going to have damp issues. And often you find that when housing estates get built and they build all the houses at the top end of the property so they've got nice views, you come along, one of the last houses to be built, you're at the bottom of the hill, everybody's stormwater comes off their roofs, goes down their driveways and ends up through your living room. And I've seen that so many times. So it's, people say, you know, can we call you in to have a look at a piece of land that we want to buy? And we can look at it and say, yeah. And we can also do percolation tests, get in a geotech person to come in and do, and we've worked with people for 30, 40 years like this. So we can say, yes, geotech engineer says that the ground in actual fact is not suitable for what you want to do, and it's better to try and choose another piece of land. We save them a lot of money because otherwise they'd build that house and then they wouldn't be happy because they've got water coming up through the tiles. So important stuff. Your house is your castle, and you cannot take too much care, and you can't be too cautious because there are so many people out there that will do you. And I'm sorry to sound negative about it, but it's not negative. It's just that we know it's cynical, maybe, because we actually know that there's a lot of people out there that do bad work, unfortunately.
Right. Okay, Eric, I think we've got one slide, and then we can actually stop the screen.
Yeah.
There we go. One last question, Eric. You have any comments on the Property Practitioners Act, which came into operation last year?
Yeah, I was sat on a panel for 4 years with Advocate Thlali and Brian Chaplock when he was with Estate Agent Affairs Board. So I know it almost word by word. And unfortunately, the finished article is not necessarily what we worked on. However, I think that it's important that it regulates the property practitioners, the estate agents, etc. And they've now all got to work with fidelity funds. And I think that's a good thing because it'll make sure that the estate agents are more professional. I think the important thing is that they refer to using disclosure documents, which I believe that the only way that disclosure documents should be used is not that there's to not allow the estate agents and the sellers to fill them in, because the buyer is going to get is not going to get the true facts of the matter. So what we're saying is, I think that disclosure documents are fine, but it needs to be filled in by a competent person, a property inspector, and a report should go with that disclosure document to outline all the salient points of the property. And I think that way it becomes an official document in the sale agreement, and that way everybody will be happy. And then you won't have any of this argy-bargy situation and unhappy happy clients.
Okay, Eric. Well, thank you very much. That
Thank
brings
you.
us to the end of today, I think. Thank you very much for sharing your time, your knowledge with us, enlightening us on many issues, and giving us your views on various issues. You're just not a man who holds back your views, which we appreciate that. So thank you for everyone who joined us today. Goodbye, and Until our next event, stay well. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Thanks so much.